one thing I discovered very early on, outside of the documentary and outside of that 4 years Drazen played in the NBA, outside of Europe, very little is known about Drazen's pre-NBA career. There were certain things about that were just fascinating to me. It's a book basically full of stories. I wrote it the way I wanted to write it. It's just one story after the next, because when I interviewed people, they had stories about Drazen. It wasn't telling you things that you already knew. So it's a deeper look at his life. I wanted to find out what sort of guy he was, and you get that by interviewing the people who knew him. But then I also wanted to research deeper than just the statistics of it. Hopefully that reflects in the book.
Then you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, can you make the pass? Yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 55, and thanks for joining me. Stay up to date with my monthly email newsletter. You will receive exclusive details on upcoming podcast episodes, future high-profile guests to appear on the show, and plenty more. Simply visit inallairness.com/news. Today, it's a special episode. I welcome a very good friend of mine, Todd Spehr. He's joined me as a co-host on a handful of other episodes, most relevant being in relation to this conversation, episode 24, inallairness.com/24. That was our Drazen Petrovic retrospective. Just last week, March the 30th, 2015, we saw the official release of Todd's new Drazen Petrovic biography. This is the edited audio from a Google Hangout that we did, which featured Todd, another good mate of mine and regular co-host of the NB85 podcast series, Aaron Steen, and of course, yours truly. To view the video chat that this audio is taken from, you can visit inallairness.com/Drazen. Towards the end of the episode, I'll share more great podcast reviews. Add yours by visiting inallairness.com/review. Show notes for this episode, including links to purchase Todd's book, are available at inallairness.com/55. Now, onto the show. Our guest today, Aaron, and I'll introduce you in a moment. He has just released a new biography titled Drazen, The Remarkable Life and Legacy of the Mozart of Basketball. He appeared on the podcast talking about the book on episode 24 of the show back in mid-2013. Now it's officially available and out in the world for all to consume. Todd Spehr, thanks for joining us, mate.
No worries, Adam. Thank you very much for having me. Good to see you both.
Excellent. Now, Aaron, you're a regular co-host of this podcast caper that we get up to here. Thanks for taking part again in another chat. How are you today, mate?
Good, thanks, Adam. Good to be back in the downtown Tacoma studios / NB85 studios for this chat with Todd and his upcoming book.
Yeah, it's going to be a good little chat here, I'm sure. Now, all going to plan, those who are watching this live Google Hangout can ask questions as we go along. Not sure if anybody will actually partake in that, but I think I've enabled it to happen. And then you should be able to send us a question along the way, which should pop up on my screen, and then we'll hopefully pose that question to Todd.
I had Mum send it to Twitter this morning, mate, just so she can, we'll have at least one question, mate, fingers crossed.
I've got a couple of backup ones just in case, so I won't be holding my breath for a few, but we'll see what happens. Now, before we actually chat all things Drazen, let's quickly cover your background a bit, Todd. We didn't actually mention it too much in our previous chat on episode 24, and also you've been on other episodes of the podcast as well, which is great, but you moved to the USA when you were a teenager.
Yep.
Do you mind just talking a little bit about when you left Australia to take up your basketball-related career in the US and college along the way and whatnot, and then even becoming an assistant coach with your alma mater?
Yeah, sure, mate. I'm not sure how exciting the background is, but when I was 16, I was practicing with a semi-professional team that was in Warrnambool, which is in Western Victoria. I grew up in a place called Camperdown, which is just a small town in the Western District, but I had an American teammate who encouraged me to sort of take my basketball playing a little bit further. So I had an opportunity to play a year of high school ball in a place called Fowler, Colorado. And had a pretty good year there, and was lucky enough to get a scholarship to play at Lamar Community College, which was a junior college in southeast Colorado. After 2 years, I transferred to a school in Kansas, Central Christian College, and I graduated in 2006. I was a good college player. I certainly wasn't a great one, but had a fairly good college career. So after I finished playing 2006, I graduated, and then I had a minor in journalism. My major was business in college, but was doing some freelance writing for a few publications, and was lucky enough to get printed in like Slam and Lindy's and a couple of Australian publications that were out at the time. And eventually that turned into, when I moved back to the US in 2009, I was hired as an assistant coach at the school that I played at. So I worked in player development and scouting. And then during my free time, I drive down to Oklahoma City, and I was able to get credentials to go to games there, and covered a lot of Thunder basketball for about the first 3 years they were in Oklahoma City. So while I was coaching during the week, and every chance I could get, I'd drive down to Oklahoma City, and the access was great. This was before the Thunder were what they are now, and the access was just unbelievable. So that's really where my writing sort of interest sort of went to the next level, and I've since had some writing at ESPN, and like I said, Slam and a few other places. So all of that led up to, due to a family situation, I had to move back to Australia at the end of 2011. And in order to stay involved with a game that had given me so much, I started this crazy idea of writing a book. So that was 3 years ago, and here we are now.
The first thing that I wanted to ask Todd about was the number one thing that I enjoy so much about doing our NB85 podcast series with Adam is that after being a fan of the game for 25 years, I'm still able to expand my knowledge on a topic that I love a tremendous amount through the research that we do for each of our episodes. You mentioned in allawareness.com/24.
Shameless self-promotion. I love it.
Shameless self-promotion. About learning new information about Drazen as part of the process of putting the book together. For you personally, how much enjoyment did you get out of learning so much new information about a guy that we all grew up watching play during the early 1990s?
That's a good question, Aaron, because there was never once where I felt, man, I don't want to do this today, or I don't want to research it. You can never know everything. And as long as there's something that you don't know, you can always chase. And I sort of had that approach. One thing I discovered very early on, outside of the documentary and outside of that 4 years Drazen played in the NBA, very little is known outside of Europe. Very little is known about Drazen's pre-NBA career. And then there were certain things about that were just fascinating to me, such as Yugoslavian athletes in general could not leave the country before the age of 28, as per the rule at the time. Drazen was the first guy to challenge that rule, and he was able to get that rule, broken, so to speak. So there were things like that. I could go on and on about certain things, but researching it I'm a big research guy. I hate reading products where the information's incorrect, so I had to make sure I had to triple check everything. But like I said, I never felt it was an obligation or a chore. Researching was a lot of fun. When you guys, if you haven't already taken a look through the book, it's a book basically full of stories. I wrote it the way I wanted to write it. It's just one story after the next, because when I interviewed people, they had stories about Drazen. It wasn't telling you things that you already knew. So it's not, Drazen scored 20 points here. The next game he scored 21. It's not a book like that. It's a deeper look at his life, and I wanted to find out what sort of guy he was, and you get that by interviewing the people who knew him, but then I also wanted to research deeper than just the statistics of it, so hopefully that reflects in the book. But a lot of fun researching, and 470 pages, it's pretty long-winded, but I reckon it rounds out pretty nice.
Something that I enjoy so much about the AIR055 podcast, Todd, is when Adam interviews these guys who perhaps don't have the profile of some of the bigger names in NBA history, is hearing their stories and hearing some of those stories. So have a full book of, how many pages was it?
470.
470 pages of Drazen Petrovic stories. Yeah, I can't wait to read it, mate.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
And I purchased the Kindle copy. It's available online, and all the links will be in the show notes to this episode, of course, which will be inallairness.com/55. And, of course, in the notes to this actual YouTube video, when it's on YouTube, there's also links to the Amazon and CreateSpace links as well to be able to purchase a book. But I purchased it on Kindle. I've only read I think I read the preface and the opening chapter last night, mate, while I was laying down in bed, and boy, it was a great read and really enjoyed it, and I look forward to getting stuck right into it as well. So already those stories are starting to come through in the very beginning there, so very exciting to get into that. And speaking of the book itself, mate, in the last week or so, just after it came out, I think it was March 30th that it was released officially, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, mate, March 30, last Monday.
Yeah, you had places like Yahoo's Ball Don't Lie and Sports Illustrated, just to name two, had some features or excerpts from the book that appeared on their websites. How did you, first of all, manage to get in touch with them to have that go onto their sites, and how did you find the reaction from people who actually read those pieces too?
You know, Adam, it was like a reflection of the whole process. People love Drazen. It made my job so easy. You know, I'd email someone and be like, oh, this is what I'm doing. Would you be interested in talking to me about Drazen? Absolutely, without doubt. And that's a reflection of Drazen and how the way people felt about him. It was the same with securing those excerpts on those websites. You know, people love Drazen. It was very easy for me to, you know, tell them about my project and get the good response. As a matter of fact, there was only, in the whole 3 years, I only got rejected once, and that was by Willis Reed, and that was for reasons that sort of went beyond his relationship with Drazen. It was, you know, more about things that were going on in his life at the time. And his cousin was Orlando Woolridge, who had just passed away at the time, and because of that experience and also the way he felt about Drazen, it was sort of too emotional for him to talk about. Other than that, it was just an open slather. People enthusiastic would email me, would talk to me for a couple of hours at a time, and, you know, like I said, it made my job easy. So that's a reflection of Drazen and the person that he was.
Was there a lot of Skype calls involved, or were you actually doing a few phone-based calls as well? How did that sort of work with trying to coordinate times that would suit, given the drastic amount of difference in time zones and things like that, mate?
It's funny, mate. I made a decision very early on that if I was going to do the project, I would do whatever sacrifice it took. So I remember I called Tom Newell, who was the assistant coach with the Nets when Drazen was there. I think we spoke from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. one day, and like, it was just, you don't mind doing those things because it was, you know, like I said, you want to make the book as strong as it could possibly be, and, you know, you cater to those people's schedule. If they're willing to give you the time, then you should be willing to make the sacrifice to get up early or stay up late or whatever it is. Mate, almost, like I remember talking to you at the time, all the calls were on Skype. All the calls were obviously international. I didn't do a single face-to-face interview. I did about 70 interviews in total, and you do what it takes, mate. You don't sort of sit around and think about it. You just do it, and I'm sure you've had this feeling many times. You get done interviewing someone, you know, you can't wait to do it again, or you just know that it was worth the effort. So you do what it takes, mate, I suppose.
Was there a particular guy or person that you chatted to who gave you a completely different sort of take on where you were heading with certain topics that you wanted to write about, that you sort of, out of nowhere, it gave you a whole new angle to investigate, or to at least establish a bit more information about going forwards? Absolutely.
Right off the top of my head, when I interviewed Warren Ligari, he was Drazen's agent in the NBA, he said when we were finishing our phone call, he said, there's one guy you need to talk to, and his name is Rich Delatry. I was like, I've got no idea who that is. He was the strength and conditioning coach at the Nets. After Drazen's half season in New Jersey in 1991, and if you guys look closely at the film, Drazen's body before that season and after, completely different. And the reason for that, he spent a summer in New Jersey with this guy, Rich Delatry. Every day those guys just went at it, and Drazen's body completely changed. He completely rebuilt his body, rebuilt his game, And it turns out these guys had this unbelievable bond. These two guys were just lifelong friends. As a result, Rich Delatry, got a job in Europe, met his wife. This is all because of Drazen. Had 3 kids, and now he actually works with Mike Fratello with the national team. That, just off the top of my head, is it the Russian national team or it's
the Ukraine?
Ukraine national team. All these opportunities opened up just because of his relationship with Drazen, and I was able to call him one day, and he spoke to me for 2 hours about everything about Drazen's body, about Drazen's attitude towards work, about Drazen's relationship with his teammates, like a guy that I had not considered to interview. And as you'll see in the book, there's a few pages devoted to basically a summer that changed Drazen's life. And 91-92, he becomes a 20-point scorer, and he had a body to compete in the NBA. It was just a turning point in his life.
And you also, I'll go ahead, Todd. Sorry, go ahead, Aaron, I should say. I'm getting people's names mixed up now. That's a worry.
That's all right, Jared, no problem. Todd, how many of those, I guess this is kind of in tone with Adam's last question, how many of those moments did you have when you had to stop and think to yourself that, I can't believe that I'm learning this now, like in whatever year it was at the time, like 2013, 2014, 2015. How many of those kinds of moments did you have? Because I'm sure with the amount of work that you put into the book that there would have been countless examples.
Yeah, numerous, Aaron, without doubt, mate. And you find it like a motivating thing. You'll find out some tiny little story, and then, or like a thread, you just want to keep pulling on the thread and see how long it'll go. And that's basically what it was like. One guy would tell you a story, and then you would ask another person about that story, and then that would lead to another story, and it just layer upon layer. And like I said to you before, I wanted it to be a book about stories, one story after the next. And you get those answers by talking to people who knew him. You can't get it out of a newspaper recap or off a documentary that goes for 2 hours. You can't just pull those things out of what limited things we get served to us. So, you speak to the people who knew him, and that's how you get the best idea. But yeah, lots of instances, mate, where I felt like that for sure.
I know you mentioned how much of a meticulous sort of researcher you are, and I can vouch for that as well. I know that you watched an incredible amount of game film from all portions of Drazen's career, going back, I think, as far as when he was 17 or 18 years old might have been the earliest. Is that correct? And also, do you mind just talking about how you got access to some of those game films and what sort of insight that gave you that, as you mentioned just a moment ago, newspaper articles or game recaps couldn't?
It's funny you bring that up, Adam, because obviously our love for game film, our mutual love for game film is the reason where this whole friendship started, 15 years ago. I'm a huge game film guy. Obviously, I've got a big collection, probably over 1,000 games, without exaggerating. So game film's a huge part of what I do. Even when I was coaching, the best part of the job was watching game film and trying to break it down. And I watched probably, I want to say about 90 games of Drazen over the last 3 years. It might be more than that, I'm not sure. But I saw his first game on American national TV, which was when he was 17, November 23, 1981 at Kentucky. That was on ESPN, which was about 2 years old at the time. There's the 1983 Yugoslav League final, which had a very controversial finish. I'll tell you, this game needs to be like a 30 for 30 because it's crazy finish. I was able to get film of that. I found a scout tape from the 1985 European Championships with Sabonis and Drazen, which was just unbelievable. You look in the weirdest places. I'd contact universities about whether they had game film on. The Yugoslav national team used to go to America every November, so you'd contact universities, see if they had any old scout tapes, which sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. There's a lot of collectors in Europe who must have been purchasing a lot of VHS or VCRs back in the day who were taping games of Drazen, so I was able to contact people in Europe. I have a contact at the NBA that was able to send me a copy of Drazen's 40-point playoff game in 92, which was game one of the first round at Cleveland. I was able to find a copy of his last game, which was about 24 hours before he was killed. You just look in the weirdest places. I obviously don't need to tell you that, but game film tells you things that you couldn't find anywhere else. I really like to analyse things and understand things. Game film tells you stuff. Drazen's game changed from Europe to the NBA. He almost completely eliminated the dribble out of his offensive game, and he retrained himself to become a catch-and-shoot guy. So game film tells you those sorts of things, and I tried to work them into the book as much as I could.
I love it. Now, for some unknown reason, Aaron, I'm not sure if you opened up an app inadvertently or something, but I don't know what's happened. My screen just went black and someone took a photo of me, which is a bit disturbing.
That's why I paused halfway through that sentence. I was like,
what's going on here? Aaron, what are you doing? You're trying to derail us.
Would you like me to smile so you can take a photo?
I'd like to tell you what I'm doing, but I actually have no idea.
I probably put you to sleep, mate. I'm hardly taking a breath here.
No, I was really enjoying it, and then I just got completely thrown.
I was actually trying to get a screenshot so I could share it later on, but I've gone and steered the car off the road and into a tree at the moment, I think.
Not good, mate. Not good at all. But speaking of derailing ourselves for a minute, mate, you mentioned, Todd, the 30 for 30 that should be done on that particular game back in the early to mid-'80s you were talking about there. What were the circumstances behind that make you so readily think that it should be, immortalised by the ESPN magic?
Well, so 1983 Yugoslav League final was played between Šibenka, which was Drazen's team, and Bosna. This was the elimination, the clinching game or whatever. Bosna was leading by 1. Drazen caught the ball, 2 seconds to go, took a shot and missed as time expired. Bosna starts celebrating on the floor. Drazen, walks up to the referee, tapping his arm, saying I got fouled. Referee calls a foul. Controversy all over the place. Drazen's coach, and he told me this in the interview, Vlade Divac, told me, he said to Drazen, make 1 and miss 2, because if you make both, we're going to win the title, but they're going to take it off us. Drazen's 18 years old, looks him in the eye and says, I'm making both of them. So no time on the clock, down by a point, goes and makes 2. You can find the film on YouTube. Šibenka is awarded the title. The next day, the Yugoslav Basketball Federation ruled that the win is not valid, so they take the title away from them. And instead of giving the title to the other team, they order a rematch. So anyway, Bosnia goes to this neutral site the next week. All their fans are in the stands. They warm up, walk out onto the floor, and they're the only team in the building. Šibenka did not go. Bosnia was awarded the title. It's a huge debate even now whether A, he got fouled before the time expired, or B, whether he even got fouled at all. But find the footage online. So Šibenka got the title taken away from them. But Drazen was 18 years old, had 38 points, was the best player on the floor, and just a crazy set of circumstances. They're not historically thought of as the title winner. But, whole story's in the book, but crazy finish.
I like how you just said it's in the book there, so I'm going to be, if I wasn't already keen enough to read it, that's it, mate. Hold it up for us. While you do actually just hold it up for a second and show so we can see it, how did you decide on that particular image to use, and then also about the naming of the book? Do you mind just elaborating a little bit on that as well too? When
I saw the photo, it was actually on every year NBA teams would issue what's called a team sheet to the media, and it would have a photo of each player. You can find them on eBay, and I saw that photo of Drazen. It was taken in October of '92. That's all really you need to know about Drazen. It just seemed like the photo that captured him the best. The Blazers sent me a photo of him, I think it was from 1990, October 1990, before his second season. And it was similar to that one, but it wasn't. That one just seems to, when I have a picture of Drazen in my mind, I see like an emotional player, and that smile seemed to capture best what he was about. So that was an easy choice for the cover. I struggled with the name. I'm not good at naming things. Obviously, Adam, you're aware of this because I tried to help you name the podcasts back in the day. But
you did too. We had some interesting ones as well.
We might have to tweet those out later on, I think.
That's true, yeah.
The reason I included the Mozart of basketball in the title, it was important to recognise the European portion of his life. He spent the first 24 years of his life in Europe. That was important to represent that portion of him, and that's how people think of him in Europe. They think of him as this larger-than-life figure. He's very much revered. So I wanted to include that in the title. And Drazen, with all due respect to Drazen Petrovic, who was a great Yugoslavian player before Drazen, I think everyone identifies with the name Drazen, so hopefully it was clear who the book's about. So that's why I went that direction.
You mentioned before, Todd, about how that photograph of Drazen encapsulates really who he is. And I know that for me personally, whenever I think of Drazen, I think of those celebrations after a big shot or a big three. I've never seen celebrations from an NBA player like it. It was just pure joy and jubilation, I guess. The best words to describe it. And that photo shows what kind of a bubbly, energetic kind of guy he was.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Aaron, because his lawyer, his attorney, was a gentleman named Nick Gojak, who had Croatian heritage. He lives in Portland. He's a guy I've become very friendly with. He would always say to me, Drazen had a childlike enthusiasm for basketball, and basically that's what you just summed up. That's how he came across. So it was important to represent that, I think, on the cover.
And speaking of his celebrations and exuberance when he made certain shots, Aaron, you alluded to it just a second ago. I think, now this is going to test my memory, I'm pretty sure it was 1992 playoffs, Game 3 back in New Jersey. The Nets were down zip 2, and then in the last 5 minutes or so, there was a couple of really great things that Drazen did. But I watched the footage, and correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but there was about 5 minutes to go. John Battle from Cleveland got into some sort of stoush with Drazen and was called for an offensive foul away from the ball, which then sort of set up one of Petro's most famous shots. Spencer Ross, I think his main line of commentary is, Petro for 3. I'm not going to try and impersonate it, unless Aaron or Todd, if you'd like to. But that sort of led to a couple of great three-pointers and some really memorable moments from Drazen. Do you mind just talking a little bit about that game? And I think you also spoke with Spencer as well for part of the book's research. Is that true?
Absolutely. There's a funny story, Adam, about that particular game. The night before, Drazen actually had access to the Meadowlands Arena. He asked the team the New Jersey Devils were the other tenants in the building, and they had a playoff game in another city. So Drazen was actually in the Meadowlands the night before that game, and he was, I suppose, acting out what he was going to do the next night, which is just a crazy story to me, and sets the tone for what took place. But yeah, they were down 0-2. Cleveland was obviously a better team, but he sort of dragged them across the line in that particular game. But Spencer Ross was a good friend of Drazen's. And this was sort of a consistent theme with people in the Nets organisation. Drazen was able to build relationships with people, which was unusual for a player to do so with team staff. Him and Spencer Ross would have lunch together, have dinner. Spencer Ross has twin sons that Drazen was friendly with. They would rebound for him on off days and things like that. And of course, the Petro for 3 call, they're sort of synonymous. Spencer Ross gave me a little bit of a story as a background to that. And he told me even still today, people ask him about it, and then he gets chills when he says it. And really cool story that they were able to have that relationship.
That was the celebration after the 3 when he puts his hands up to his head.
Yep.
Like that, as he's running back down the court, and you can just see. I'd be surprised if the other man had had a happier moment in his entire life. That was the way that it came across on the screen. Yeah,
well, Bill Raftery said this is as good as being home. So that's what I think of when I see that play. But the Meadowlands, and Adam, you like to tell the story. The Meadowlands was not the most occupied NBA building. People would tell me, Herb Turetsky's the scorekeeper with the Nets, and I don't mean to name drop. It sounds like I'm name dropping all the time, but he told me that Drazen's the most popular player in Nets history. He's been with the Nets, or he's been with New Jersey since they were in the ABA, and he said Drazen's the most popular player the Nets have ever had because he would draw fans in, and that's why people in Europe, especially in Croatia, were so captured by him, because he involved you in the game by the way he celebrated. He'd make a 3 and he'd turn around and celebrate. So Drazen was able to inspire things within people that was pretty unusual from players.
You mentioned before about how he was actually on the court on the night before visualizing what he was going to do in that game. It's something that you hear on a regular basis from professional athletes is visualization of what they're going to do on the court or on the field. So that's a fantastic story, mate. So that would be, I'm sure, an example of the quality of the story in the book, mate.
Drazen had a very analytical mind, Aaron. He knew who the referees were going to be on the morning of the game. He knew the statistics of every play. He knew percent. He didn't just know points per game. He knew percentages. He had a calculating mind. He knew what numbers he had during the game. He would correct scorekeepers during after games if the box score was. He had an analytical mind, and he And that's one of the reasons he was successful in the NBA. He knew he had to change his game in order to be successful. So the way Drazen thought about basketball was most unusual, and I think that's why he was so unique.
Now, what I was going to say earlier, Todd, was first of all, name drop away. You can name drop for as long as you like. It's fascinating to hear just all these people that you've chatted to along the way who you might not think straight away that they're the most immediate person that you chat to in relation to the story, but it all helps develop the overall narrative. So that's part of the special appeal of a book such as this as well, and it shows the amount of comprehensive and exhaustive research that you did. So that's fine, name drop away. The second thing was, do you have a favourite Drazen game that you saw, that you have in your collection? I know you mentioned you watched maybe upwards of 90 games. Is there a particular one that just stands out above the rest that encapsulates everything that he was about?
Yeah, gosh, that's a good question, mate, because I
know you've got a stack, so it's going to be maybe hard to narrow down.
No, I do have a favourite game, mate. November 16, 1983, the Yugoslav national team played at Notre Dame, and I have a black and white scouting film, and Notre Dame obviously recruited him, signed him to a letter of intent, but I just think it was, the first step, really, on this lifelong journey to get to the NBA. The first step, it's more symbolic of what happens outside of the game, I suppose, but Drazen had 24 points, 7 assists, 10 of 16 from the field, so it was obviously a big stepping stone for him. And after the game, he went down to Digger Phelps' office, and he pulled out a letter of intent. Drazen signed it, and then went back to Europe. He never fulfilled it, but Drazen was about changing perceptions of the European players, the way that Americans view them, and that was sort of the first step towards doing that. But to narrow a game down, the games where Drazen played against Sabonis in the mid-'80s, before Sabonis' Achilles sort of fell apart, they were a lot of fun to watch. To narrow one game would be tough, but certainly a lot of fun watching those game films for sure.
One thing that you mentioned, Todd, in Awareness 24 with Adam, that the reverence that Drazen had in Europe among European players, and you mentioned about before Toni Kukoc was drafted to the NBA, it was mentioned to him that Drazen perhaps wasn't going that well in the NBA, and just the reaction of Kukoc, who could not believe that a guy like Drazen wasn't succeeding in the NBA.
That was, and I know exactly who told me that story. I know exactly what you're referencing. Kukoc had genuine anxiety, because if Drazen can't do it, then what chance do we have? And that's how they viewed him. Drazen was about 3 and 4 years older than, say, Kukoc and Radja and Divac and guys like that, and he was literally the next step ahead. So for him to stumble was just incomprehensible to those guys, and made them question, geez, should we do it? But Drazen's belief sort of forced a trade out of Portland, forced into an opportunity where he was successful. But yeah, the Europeans were, there was perceptions held against them by the Americans. Every guy was subjected to those except Sabonis. He superseded those perceptions held by the Americans against the Europeans. But a guy like Drazen, a European guard, there's a story that was in the Chicago Tribune in '86 by a writer named Phil Hirsch. You guys could probably find it on the archives, where he was examining just how ready Drazen would be. And Drazen was averaging 40 a game in Europe at the time. It's like, he's not going to play that way in the NBA. How's he going to survive? How's he going to fit in? Very, very interesting. There was, and that's one of the things I wanted to address in the book was, first of all, why were those perceptions in place? How did Drazen overcome them? And, guys like him and Marciulionis and Divac, they talk about being pioneers, genuine pioneers. They really had to break those perceptions, but Drazen wanted to break them in a different way. Marciulionis was not the best player in Golden State. Divac was not the best player in LA. Europeans came to the NBA and they changed the foundation of the NBA, but the superstars, that galaxy, so to speak, was not changed. So Drazen wanted to get in that area. And one thing interesting, just when talking about Europeans, Schrempf was not considered, and this was made apparent to me through the research, he was not considered the same way that Drazen was, or Marciulionis. He went to high school in America, he went to college in America, and he was sort of considered a product of the American system. And obviously he was a better player before Drazen was. He was successful, 6 man in 91 and 92. He was a established before Drazen was, but Drazen's was considered a pure product of a European system and the first one to be successful. So a lot of dynamics, interesting dynamics that sort of came out within the book.
All fascinating topics as well, which I'm sure that we're going to enjoy when we get right into the depths of the book as well. And speaking of the European side of things, mate, what sort of plans do you have, or you already have underway, perhaps, to help celebrate the book's release in the vital European market, where I'm sure it's going to be incredibly appealing to a lot of basketball fans and just natives in general?
Yeah, and look, it's exciting, mate, that so many people are interested in the book, but it was very important that the book be translated into Croatian, and that the plans are underway. Actually, the Petrovic family are organising that. They would, have invited me to Zagreb later in the year to launch that book, so we're sort of addressing that as we speak. But I've had people from France and Greece and Spain who have asked me whether translated versions are going to be available, and whether that becomes a reality or not. But it's all because of Drazen and his story and how that sort of resonates in Europe. So if it can open up a few doors down the way, mate, then all the better. But it's all about his story, so lots of interest there. You don't have to sell Drazen to people, certainly not. So we'll see how we go, mate. But European market's obviously very big, so hopefully the word can get out and more things can open up.
Oh, definitely so. Now, Aaron, before we wrap things up a little bit, do you have anything else you'd like to ask Todd in relation to this book, or even just old school hoops in general, I guess?
Just in regards to Drazen's passing, Todd, in 1993, the NBA took a real hit, of course, with the initial retirement of Jordan. But there were two guys who were very prominent players in the NBA, in Drazen and Reggie Lewis, who I tie those two together, unfortunately, because of their circumstances, and them passing away so close to each other in 1993. Even though the NBA definitely missed MJ, I think that there's no question that Reggie Lewis was an all-star the previous year in 92. Drazen probably should have been in 1993, but I don't think that there's any question that the loss of those two definitely contributed to the loss that the NBA felt when MJ first left.
Yeah, exactly, Aaron. And a funny thing happened at the shooting guard position in 94. Sprewell was first-team All-NBA. He wasn't even on the All-Star ballot. Reggie Miller had that obviously big postseason in 94. There was a gap to be filled with MJ leaving, and part of me thinks that there was something for Drazen and of course Reggie Lewis. There was a space for them to move into that spot, as the elite two guards in the league, and just a crazy set of circumstances. How do you explain sort of things like that? Obviously, Drazen's death is, how do you even put into words why that happened or understand why that happened? But Reggie Lewis as well, who was an unbelievable competitor, just a really versatile guy, athletic. And, everyone viewed him at the time. I'm sure you guys remember, he was going to be the next guy to, Boston had never been bad before. He was going to be the guy that was going to keep them good. So 3 of the 5 best shooting guards in the league. Opening day 93, 94 comes and none of them are there. So very unusual.
Tragic stuff in both circumstances, really. Now, amongst other people, the esteemed Bob Ryan and Harvey Arrington have also sung your book's praises. Do you mind just quickly detailing how that actually came to be? Because that's incredible to have the glowing recommendations of those guys on the back of your book.
Yeah, I've been emailing Bob Ryan for years, asking him all sorts of stupid questions about Maravich and Larry and things he fat leader. I emailed him probably about every player that played in the 80s or 70s, but he's a reservoir of information. But Harvey Arrington, I interviewed him for a story I did for Slam on Iverson in 2010, and he's one of the most brilliant basketball minds that I've ever come across, and the way he writes about the game is certainly a standard that I want to reach. He knew Drazen personally, and he had a good relationship with him, and he was a terrific help with the book, a great interview, and he wrote about some interesting things about Drazen's life, that went beyond the court, such as, Drazen's thoughts that maybe xenophobia had kept him off the All-Star team in 93. Deeper topics he talked about with Drazen, obviously his relationship with Vlade and things like that. But so to have both of them, endorse the book was just a huge thrill. I'm not sure I'm worthy of it, but I'm glad they did it.
Awesome stuff, mate. And Aaron?
Yeah, we put the question out there to our followers on Twitter if anyone had a question for Todd in regards to Drazen, and we've had a grand total of one response. John Boland, at JW Boland, John asked, how big of a star would Drazen have been if he were American, both from a relatability and marketing standpoint?
That's a terrific question. I have no idea, because I think part of Drazen's appeal and part of the reason he was wired the way he was because he was European. A lot of his motivation was, like I said earlier, about changing perceptions. Marketability, man, that's a tough one to answer. And I don't know, maybe he's just Joe Dumas, or maybe he's just Mitch Richmond. The reason Drazen was unique was because he was European. He grew up in a tiny place in Croatia. How many guys are born in Šibenik, and then by the time they're 28, they're one of the 15 best players in the world? That was part of his unique appeal. So it was. That's where he was born. But that's a good question. I'm not sure if I answered it properly, but I think part of his appeal was the fact he was European. But maybe if he's born in America, then he's viewed as just another really, really good player that, along the journey, that we just enjoyed watching. Who knows? Yeah,
I think that we're all glad that Drazen is who he was and was from where he was from. So I still think that that he would have been regarded as highly as what he was and what we all knew him to be before he passed away. And I mentioned before that he probably should have been an All-Star in 1993, and I get a bit of a beam up on it about guys who miss out on All-Star berths. Just as an example, I feel that Dennis Rodman missed out on several All-Star nods during the 1990s, and that's one that I also consider that Drazen should have been on the East squad in 1993 in Utah.
Yeah, well, how Rodman wasn't an All-Star in 96, he completely changed that Bulls team. That's obviously a story for another day, but yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. That was very important to Drazen, and it was part of the reason why he was considering going back to Europe. Not only that, but his contract situation with the Nets was not sorting itself out. But it hurt Drazen not making the All-Star team. Having said that, making All-NBA third team was almost made up for that, and that's probably a better honour, even though it's not as heralded as the All-Star team for whatever reason. But he did feel vindicated before he was killed. So it was, they didn't name him to that team after the accident. That was before, and he thoroughly deserved it. They were on pace to probably win 50 games before he got hurt in March. So yeah, he deserved it for sure.
Thank you to John for that question. I'm sure all the other questions were somehow lost on the information superhighway.
Yeah, I'm disappointed my mum didn't jump on Twitter and at least get us up to 2 questions.
I thought my mum would have been on there. She's always on the Facebook page. But anyhow, I thought she might have chimed in with a question and said, what is the NBA? But anyhow, so thanks again, mate. Aaron, thanks again there, mate. Todd, thank you very much for being a part of the episode today and joining us to chat about it. I know we're obviously good friends and we've gone back 10, 15 years since we've known each other, and it's been great still to be able to chat about this dream that you've followed through and have turned into a reality by 3 or 4 years of hard work getting the book to come to fruition. So that's fantastic. What's the best way that people can, first of all, follow yourself and then also access more details about the book? Where would you like to send them, mate?
Before I say that, I just want to thank you both for your support. You guys obviously been aware of the project for quite some time, well before we got to this stage. So really appreciate your support. You guys have been terrific. So thanks for having me on. But you guys can hit me up on Twitter at ToddSpehr35. I'm not sure if that's down the bottom or not, because that's a whole other story. But there's also a website that I've just launched over the weekend, bookofdrazen.com. So they're going to be adding more content there is across the journey. But there's Facebook page /Drazen book, and obviously you can check out the excerpts online, various places. But yeah, this is all about Drazen, all about his story. So really, really fun process. So hope you guys enjoy it, and hopefully learn a few things. But yeah, a lot of fun to do. So I'm honoured that I've been able to tell his story. Really appreciate you supporting the book. So thank you very much.
No worries, mate.
Yeah, good to see you again, Toddy. Looking forward to my copy of the book rolling out from Amazon. I actually wanted to buy the Kindle version myself, but realised I didn't have a Kindle. So
That's a prerequisite, mate. Come on.
It's actually a free app. It's Amazon Kindle app or something like that, and I got it for free and then just bought the book a couple of days ago, and I've just got into it now, so I'm really enjoying it as well. But all the links to that will be in the show notes as well, and we'll do whatever we can to help promote it, Todd. But yeah, all the best, mate.
No worries at all. Much appreciated, guys.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. As always, you can suggest topics or guests that you'd like to hear conversations with. You can leave a voicemail. Simply visit inallairness.com/voice. Click on Start Recording, leave your message, and then press stop. You can even listen to it back before you submit it. Press send and you're done. Time now to share more great feedback from fans of the show. Here is the most recent review, and now I am finally up to date with all the podcast reviews that have been received. Therefore, it's a perfect time for you to add yours. I'd really appreciate it if you do. I hope to read more reviews in future episodes. Thanks this time around to Lamar Matic. He actually also has a fantastic YouTube channel. Look for his name on YouTube. His real name is, and I probably will pronounce it incorrectly, Rainers from Latvia. Thank you very much for this review. The review is titled The Most Essential NBA History Podcast. So he's off to a fair start. He writes, I'm tempted to call this the most essential podcast centered on NBA history, as it produces content concerning the league's yesteryears like no one else really does. With his work, Adam Ryan rivals such big names like Bill Simmons, who would occasionally touch on the same topics. The wide array of relevant guests is satisfying, as are the questions that are asked to them, which help to go through the particular player's or person's life and career. Adam always manages to find a connection with the guest, and the exchanges are informative and smooth. Overall, just a fantastic podcast for NBA junkies. Now that is one of the best reviews I've ever received. Can't thank you enough. Thank you very much. Worldwide, the show currently has 48 reviews, 45 are on iTunes, and 3 are on Stitcher. Thanks for your continued support. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways that you can support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Word-of-mouth recommendations are definitely worth their weight in gold. You can subscribe to my show in various ways on iTunes, inallairness.com/review. Add it to your Stitcher playlist, inallairness.com/Stitcher. You can also subscribe on Player FM, TuneIn Radio, Pocket Casts, and many other podcatchers. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.